This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. At least 5 people killed in a Christmas parade in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. Pockets of protest erupt across Europe as COVID restrictions return. And China and ASEAN hold a special virtual summit commemorating 30 years of dialogue. Well, our top story for this hour, at least 5 people have been killed and more than 40 injured after an SUV plowed into a Christmas parade in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. Police say a person of interest has been taken into custody. Nick Harper has the latest.
Chaotic and horrific scenes coming out of this holiday parade. Bear in mind that this was a holiday parade where there were marching bands, there were people dancing in the street, and yet social media shows mobile phone footage of this red SUV ploughing into that group of people as they were marching down the street. People who were taking part in this parade. It was adults but also children as well, really enjoying that holiday atmosphere as we head into the Thanksgiving week here in the United States. The police chief, Dan Thompson, called it a tragedy. He did say at this stage it was unknown if this was linked to terrorism, because that is, of course, the worry. Bear in mind that the city where this took place is less than an hour's drive away from the city of Kenosha, and that is where Carl Rittenhouse was found not guilty on Friday of shooting a couple of people. It was a traumatic event in that city. It was a trial that really produced a tinderbox for the city. High tensions, but high tensions for the whole of the state of Wisconsin. And there is that fear that we could see protests or potentially reprisal attacks as a result of that verdict, which is very much split America. But police very much saying at this stage they don't know if it was terrorism, so they are waiting to find out. But the response that we've already seen on social media is really that one of shock, of anguish, but also fear as to what potentially may have unfolded in this city during what should have been a very happy event, this holiday parade.
Meanwhile, a couple who witnessed the moment the car sped through the parade has been sharing what they saw.
We didn't understand what was going on because I thought the car was going to get ahead of the parade. When I turned, I saw that it ran over someone, so everyone started to scream, and everyone started getting on the side. After I got closer to the scene, I saw many people on the floor. That was the moment I stopped filming because I was really shocked at seeing all the people that were bleeding and screaming in terror. When I got closer to the scene, I also heard some gunshots, so people started getting even more scared and desperately running away.
When the SUV passed by at maximum speed, I said, "What's going on?" There was a girl there getting candy. This girl was nearly taken away by the SUV. Then it stopped and everyone started screaming.
Let's head over to Europe now, where demonstrations continue across the continent as new COVID restrictions go into effect. Protests turned violent in Brussels on Sunday night. Police fired tear gas and used a water cannon to break up crowds after protesters began throwing objects. People are outraged at new rules that include a ban on unvaccinated people from bars and restaurants. Meanwhile, over in the Netherlands, protests continued in several cities for the 3rd night in a row after the government imposed a 3-week partial lockdown. Many European countries are seeing a surge in infections, as CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
Cases are spiking right across Europe as winter kicks in. This is Ukraine, where hospitals are coming under huge strain. Less than a quarter of the population's been vaccinated.
It is the infodemics that is affecting people to make the right choice with informed information.
In Czech Republic, Christmas plans are going ahead for those who've had their jabs. It is one of a number of countries restricting the movement of the unvaccinated. Its neighbour Austria has had to bring a full lockdown back, which has also led to violent protests. With vaccine scepticism running high, Austria is set to become the first European country to make vaccinations mandatory. In Britain, cases are high too, but officials are far more relaxed. They've gone with a live with COVID approach, letting the virus circulate through autumn and rolling out 400,000 booster shots a day. Health Minister Sajid Javid said that's proven to be the right approach.
We made a tough decision back in the start of the summer. Other countries didn't follow our course, and we decided that, of course, we want to start opening up. And if you're going to do that, it's best to do it into summer. It's far safer to do it in summer. Sadly, other countries in Europe did not do that.
Winter is only just starting. It looks set to be another long one.
Well, CGTN's Giles Gibson is in Brussels, Belgium, where the European Union is headquarters, and he joins us now for the latest. Hi, Giles. What is the state of protest across Europe over COVID rules?
Well, here in Brussels in Belgium, we had 35,000 protesters marching through the centre of the city on Sunday. They called this event Together for Freedom, and they were protesting against new coronavirus restrictions that have been brought in by the Belgian government. Those include a 4-day mandatory teleworking or working from home, and also toughening up the restrictions on things like mask wearing for children. This march through the centre of the city on Brussels really broke up into pretty violent scenes towards the end of the march as night was falling here in Brussels. You saw police using tear gas and water cannon against protesters who were confronting them. And that is the sort of scene that we've seen breaking out right across the continent in recent days and recent weeks. Protesters going out onto the streets to make their anger about these new coronavirus restrictions very palpable, and then police confronting them with tear gas and water cannon and that sort of thing.
Giles, I mean, when we're talking about Europe, we're talking about a number of countries. We've mentioned Belgium, we've mentioned the Netherlands. In which other countries are you hearing of such protests, and how are governments responding to the demonstrations?
Well, really what we're seeing is countries that are bringing in new coronavirus restrictions. You're seeing as a result these protesters hitting the streets as well. It's not just here in Belgium, as you were saying. We've had this 3-week partial lockdown announced in the Netherlands, and you've seen very violent scenes breaking out in cities such as Rotterdam and The Hague. We've also seen Austria going one step further, ordering a full lockdown for its citizens, so people only really allowed to leave their homes for essential things such as going out to the supermarket. That 20-day lockdown is going to be reviewed after 10 days, and you've seen protests in Vienna. We've also seen protests breaking out in Croatia and Italy, and really governments around Europe are combating these, using the police, of course, but also trying to put out those public messages saying that we need to bring in these restrictions because we're seeing such a dramatic surge in cases in so many different countries across the continent.
Thank you so much for that, Giles Gibson, speaking to us from Brussels, Belgium. Aid and security to food and public health. China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations reiterated their commitment to cooperation in many fields. After a special virtual summit marking 30 years of talks, they issued a statement calling for a new comprehensive strategic partnership. They also reaffirmed respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as emphasized the need to promote an environment conducive to negotiations regarding a code of conduct in the South China Sea. China reaffirmed its support to the bloc in playing a bigger role in the United Nations, the G20 and APEC. Our reporter Rian Meltzer in Kuala Lumpur and Li Xinhua in Beijing have more.
This comes, of course, after ASEAN and China already have a well-established free trade agreement and are now partners in this huge free trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But a comprehensive strategic partnership just opens the possibilities of cooperation and collaboration in a whole number of other spheres, and just generally to deepen that collaboration. In a sense, this summit was building on last month's ASEAN-China summit, which happened on the sidelines of the main ASEAN summit, virtually hosted by Brunei, and a number of the same topics continued to crop up. So one would be, of course, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, with several of the ASEAN countries yet to ratify this deal, although they signed it a year ago. Malaysia is among those. So the push is for these countries to quickly sign the deal, ratify the deal, so that it can kick into gear, and that can help accelerate the economic recovery for the region. But above all, this summit is really about emphasizing how far ASEAN-China relations have come over the past 30 years and laying the groundwork for that to continue and even deepen as we move forward.
We know the focus is comprehensive. That is the key word, and that is for sure the most important message from the summit. It's the highest level of relationship possible between governments, and this means their relationship will go further than simply trade agreements. We have been talking about trade agreements a lot, and both sides are expected to align laws as well as security this time with a new or upgraded partnership signed. So this is definitely a milestone of China-ASEAN relations. As for the future relations, if we look at President Xi Jinping's proposals, they come in this particular order. The first two are focused on peace, then a prosperous home, then a beautiful home that is about ecological conservation. The last one is about amicable home together. So what is likely to dominate the future relations from what we can see is maintaining regional stability. The strategic comprehensive partnership is likely to play a positive role in stabilizing regional security in the South China Sea, of course. China and ASEAN have been holding talks for years to draft a code of conduct to avoid confrontation. And such a draft was made in 2018, but little progress has been made. But now with the upgraded partnership signed, it is unlikely tensions will turn into open conflict. As for a prosperous home, it refers to a slew of measures to shore up economic cooperation on both sides, including RCEP, China-ASEAN Free Trade Area, Belt and Road Cooperation. China has also applied to join the CPTPP, as said, which is set to boost their trade volumes. So apart from security, there shall be more cooperation on combating the pandemic. So the upgraded partnership will for sure make a difference in multiple areas in the near future.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. Our correspondents Robert Nagila in Nairobi and Nama Muhyiddin in Khartoum are standing by with some of the latest news making headlines across Africa. That's next on Africa Live. Do stay tuned.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's military reinstates Abdallah Hamdok as prime minister, but protests continue. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ends his 5-day African visit. And Kenya issues COVID-19 vaccination mandate. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. More stories making headlines. In business, Sudan says that it is committed to reforms proposed by the IMF. And in your sport, Mamelodi Sundowns ladies football team arrives back in South Africa after claiming an historic CAF title in Egypt. We begin Africa Live in Sudan, where Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been reinstated following last month's military coup. The civilian leader and General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan both presented a 14-point agreement. The African Union has welcomed the deal, calling it an important step towards a return to constitutional order. Asatal reports.
Nearly a month after a military takeover, Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been reinstated. The military took power in October, placing Hamdok under arrest. Now a 14-point agreement looks to put the country's transition towards democracy back on track.
We don't want to eliminate anyone, as per what's been agreed on during the national conference. We want a real partnership with all the national political forces, so we could build institutions capable of transitioning us to civilian rule.
Following Hamdok's arrest, thousands took to the streets, with the military facing accusations of using live rounds to quell demonstrations. In signing the deal, the reinstated Prime Minister said he hopes to stop the bloodshed.
We are trying to preserve the blood of Sudanese youth. I know our youth have the capacity for sacrifice, determination, and giving up all that is precious. But Sudanese blood is precious. Let us stop the bloodshed and direct the youth energy into construction and development.
But protests continued, with demonstrators marching towards the presidential palace. Protesters demanded the military be held accountable for those killed during the protest. The deal was rejected by the Sudanese Professionals Association and the Forces of Freedom and Change. The FFC, a civilian coalition, said it did not recognize any agreement with the military. Astatal, CGTN.
For further details and analysis on that story, we're joined by CGTN's Naba Muhyiddin, who is in Khartoum, and Nabil Nigim Eddin, a political analyst who's based in Cairo. Thank you so much to you both for joining us on Africa Live. Naba, let's begin with you in Khartoum. The agreement has been signed. What are the details of this deal?
Thank you, Hannah. The agreement mainly is talking about keeping the partnership with this, between civilians and the military wings to make it successful, and also talking about the transitional government that will be periodically headed by military and civilians, just like the last constitutional draft and pact. And also it's talking about investigations on the killings of the protesters in the 3 weeks after the military took the power on October 25th and suspended the constitutional draft. It's also assured that the constitutional draft will be the reference for the transitional government, the new one. And Abdallah Hamdok, with his restatement, he will be free in choosing or appointing government out of technocrats without interfering on this to stop the political polarization that Sudan has witnessed in over 2 years. And also it's talking about the constitutional draft and an amendment of 2020 where rebel groups have signed the deal pacts and joined the power sharing agreement. So it's talking about how the transitional government will be run and the fresh elections after 1.5 years, and also the releasing of the political detainees.
Nabil, let's bring this to you over in Cairo. How important or significant is this agreement for Sudan, and also not just the country, but also the region as a whole?
Actually, the political agreement between General Burhan and Dr. Abdullah Hamdok is quite important in such delicate time for Sudan. Sudan was on the verge of going into the dark valley of a civil bloody war. Marches in the streets, the military junta on the other side, and the international pressure on the military generals. So the agreement has stopped the deterioration in the political scene in Sudan. Number two, the economy of Sudan is in a very dire strait situation. America has stopped or has frozen the 750 million, and the International Bank as well has frozen almost $2.5 billion US dollars. The Paris conference output was on hold. So the situation was really not good at all. Now, the importance of this agreement is, number one, Sudan is back in the peaceful, I hope, peaceful track. And the democracy, pro-democracy forces should come together and realize that it's not the end of the road. It is just the beginning.
Well, speaking about that, Naba, on one hand, you've got some people who are welcoming this deal, including the African Union as an organization, who have hailed this deal and this agreement as a step forward. But we're also getting these reports of protests against the agreement. Why is that the case, Naba?
Actually, because the protesters are surprised with this political pact and deal between Hamdok and Burhan, and because of the title of the pact itself, it's a deal between Burhan and Hamdok. And before that, for the protesters, it seems like there was a deadlock and suddenly there is an agreement. So protesters think that Hamdok is jumping over people's aspirations, and they said that preserving the country from falling apart and the bloodshed is just an execution, because it seems like the main political coalition is excluded. That means that more escalation is expected. The protesters also put great hopes on Hamdok that the transitional justice will be achieved. And the first thing is to be tackled is the sacrifices and the investigations on the killing, not only on the past 3 weeks, but also in the past 2 years and a half. So the protesters think reinstatement of Abdullah Hamdok is just a political immunity for the military takeover that took place on the 25th. It's not a correction for the democracy path. People were so frustrated, and they think that Abdullah Hamdok was representing the hope for civilian-led government, but this sudden reinstatement without enough consultation, without even wider talks with different political bodies, and especially the FFC coalition, people think it's a jump in the dark and it will complicate the political scene. And now there is calls for even ousting the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, because the street now is divided into two. People who want to save time and they think this is the only exit Sudanese they have right now, and people who said no, this is against the main or the fundamental demand people want, which is no negotiation, no talks, no power sharing with the military generals after 2 years and a half that just vanished in 1 minute after the military took power on October 25th.
Nabil, in light of what Naba has said and just what she's mentioned about those protests and just this division that seems to be there among the people in Sudan, do you really think that this agreement is enough to put Sudan's transition back on track?
I believe very much that the 21st of November's political agreement between the generals and the reinstated prime minister is a beginning of the big issues and big questions. First question is, would the generals prove honest towards their commitment to hand over power? The second question is, would or will Dr. Abdullah Hamdok be strong enough and authorized enough to pursue his goals? Number three, would the pro-democracy forces get together and support this guy to pave the way for the constitutional body and the legislative body in Sudan? All these challenges has got to be or have got to be faced and handled in a quite national concept, not and away from the personal or political agendas. Sudan needs great support from the regional powers, the international powers, and before all, from the Sudanese people and political forces themselves.
Thank you so much for all that. Political analyst Nabil Ngemeddine speaking to us from Cairo, and our very own correspondent Naba Muhyiddin, who is speaking to us from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Well, let's take a closer look into who Abdullah Hamdok is and what his priorities have been as Prime Minister. CGTN's Robin Nagila has more.
Born in 1956 in South Kordofan State, Abdullah Hamdok studied economics at universities in Khartoum and Manchester. Over the course of his career, Hamdok worked for the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the African Development Bank, and the Trade and Development Bank in Ethiopia. Upon taking office as Prime Minister, he focused his attention on the economic crisis and uniting the country. To address the public debt burden, the Prime Minister began talks with the IMF and World Bank, getting relief on more than $56 billion in debt and access to new funds. He also opened talks with the United States and succeeded in getting Sudan removed from its list of states that sponsor terrorism. In October 2020, he oversaw the signing of a peace deal to end unrest in Darfur, Kordofan and Blue Nile regions. But his economic blueprint ran into trouble when he scrapped fuel subsidies and the devaluation and floating of the currency. The reforms were unpopular and anti-government protests broke out. His troubles escalated in mid-September this year after protesters blockaded Sudan's main seaport, triggering nationwide food and fuel shortages. Divisions within the umbrella civilian alliance in the Sovereign Council also deepened, and in October, Hamdok was placed under house arrest following a military coup. On Sunday, amidst ongoing protests, he was released from house arrest and signed a deal to return as Prime Minister. Robert Nakela, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ended his 5-day African tour in Senegal over the weekend. That's after visiting Kenya and Nigeria. In Dakar, the American diplomat met the private sector, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and President Macky Sall. Discussions focused on ways to deepen a strong relationship between the United States and Senegal. Mohamed Abubakar has more.
On Saturday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken talked first with private sector players at a hotel in Dakar. He also attended a women's economic and digital roundtable. At this meeting, Blinken and the Senegalese Minister of the Economy signed 4 memoranda of understanding worth $1 billion. The funds will also go towards road infrastructure and public security in Senegal.
4 U.S. companies signed 4 memoranda of understanding with the government of Senegal. 3 of these companies are proposing partnerships with Senegalese Road Construction and Management Agency to improve transport infrastructure. Quebec plans to install 375 traffic lights in Dakar, as well as traffic technology to reduce congestion and improve the efficiency of motorized travel in the city, which will also reduce carbon emissions. ABD Group plans to build a bridge in Ziguinchor and Tobo with steel produced in the US. Bechtel is designing a toll road from Dakar to St. Louis with support from the US International Development Finance Corporation. The fourth company, Motorola, hopes to create a digital communications network for public safety in cooperation with the Ministry of Home Affairs in order to improve security coordination throughout Senegal.
La quatrième entreprise, Motorola.
The U.S. Secretary of State held a joint press conference with his Senegalese counterpart Aissata Tall Sall. The two discussed cooperation between the U.S., Senegal and the African continent.
Senegal and the United States have indeed been friends for 6 decades, 60 years of diplomatic relations, 60 years of building on the common foundation that we have of democracy. Senegal is a democracy, an engine of economic growth in West Africa, a leader in African institutions, a contributor to international peacekeeping efforts. And we deeply value the partnership between our countries, but we want to take it to a new level of ambition, mutuality, and effectiveness.
Given Senegal's leadership role in the Friends of the Gulf of Guinea, as well as the African Union and in the regional body ECOWAS, the West African country is seen to be very well positioned to help lead progress on democracy and security in West Africa.
We have a diplomacy of sovereignty from which we do not exclude anyone, but also in which we have classic friends, historical partners. We are not going to turn our backs on old partners for new ones. We will work with everyone, each according to their own interests. The most important thing is that we can agree on how to cooperate and how to move forward together.
In Dakar, the U.S. Secretary of State announced that to help young people and women in Senegal to pursue their dreams of entrepreneurship, USAID was awarding $14.8 million to the U.S.-based organization Windrock International. In addition to offering training programs for mentoring and marketing, the organization will provide financing for Senegalese youth and women entrepreneurs who want to start businesses in the fields of agriculture, health, energy, water, sanitation and hygiene. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
In Libya, interim Premier Abdul Hamid Dbeibah has registered as a candidate in next month's presidential election. According to the Elections Commission, 56 people have submitted applications to run in the presidential poll. Dbeibah joins a list that includes Libya's parliament speaker Gila Saleh, Eastern military strongman Khalifa Haftar, and Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Libya's former leader Muammar Gaddafi. Libya's first ever direct presidential poll is scheduled for December the 24th. It comes as the UN seeks to end a decade of violence in the oil-rich country.
I submitted today my candidacy file to be able to serve you for no other aim in order to run in the coming presidential elections. We pray God to help us all in order to do our good for our great country and for our great people.
Well, CGTN's Adel Muruhi is in Cairo and he joins us for more. Hi there, Adel. A very crowded field of candidates for Libya's presidency. How important is this for Libya's democracy?
Well, this is significant development. As you've said, this is the first of its kind elections to be, if it holds on time, of course, to be held in Libya. And therefore, many are looking forward to the diversity it provides. We're talking about nearly 60 people so far, and it seems that today is the last day for the Elections Committee to receive applications. So in general, it's a great display of diversity. The candidates who are running, almost all the prominent political figures on the scene today in Libya have been announced their candidacy for the presidential elections, and there are dozens more who maybe no one have heard about. We've seen also former officials from the government of national accord. We've seen, as you've mentioned, Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi, the son of former President Muammar Gaddafi, and one of the most prominent figures from the older regime that has been ousted during the 2011 uprising. And therefore, in general, to see such masses, such scores of people running for the presidency is great for the democratic process, but also we have to wait until the Elections Committee confirm which of these or who of these will be definitely running after it it is expected to exclude some of the candidacy or the candidature for people running, especially when it applies it to the elections law that guides the elections in general.
Thank you so much for all that, Adel. I'm sure we'll continue to hear from you on that story. Adel Maruhi speaking to us from Cairo. Let's cross over to Democratic Republic of Congo now, where gunmen have killed a police officer and kidnapped 5 Chinese nationals working at a gold mine. According to Chinese embassy in the DRC, the incident took place in the village of Mukera in South Kivu province. The embassy is urging Chinese citizens living in the area to leave as soon as possible. Let's now take a short break and return to more in Africa Live, including Kenya issues COVID-19 vaccination mandate to citizens. Scientists in Uganda are encouraging more people to consider adding insects to their diets. Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Let's head over to Kenya now, which has issued a new COVID-19 vaccination mandate. Authorities say those who seek government services as well as people boarding flights and using public transport should be fully vaccinated and have proof of vaccination by the 21st of December. According to the government, those who do not comply are to face a penalty. Kenya will launch a 10-day mass vaccination campaign from Friday. Since March, the country has reported over 253,000 cases of COVID-19, as well as 5,325 deaths.
We have so far received some 10.7 million COVID-19 vaccine doses and administered some 6.4 million vaccinations. I'm happy to report that among our priority groups, 88% of our health workers and 79% of our teachers are now fully vaccinated. It's becoming increasingly apparent that as countries battle the pandemic, a lot more emphasis is being placed on the need to have more people vaccinated. Vaccination is a critical pillar in the control of the pandemic as a long-term solution to prevention of severe cases of the disease, deaths, and enabler to return to normalcy.
We're now joined by CGTN's Robert Nagila in Nairobi and Dr. Aslam Dessou, a co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum based in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for you both for being on the program. Robert, let's begin with you. Kenya becoming the latest country on the continent to impose a deadline for people to be vaccinated to access government services. What more can you tell us about this mandate, Robert?
Well, this goes back to earlier this year when the Kenyan government announced that it intended to have at least 10 million Kenyans vaccinated by the end of the year. Now, last month in October, the government lifted most of the COVID-19 restrictions because the infection rate had dropped below 2%. However, it says it's noticed that there's been a slowdown in the uptake of vaccines since then, and that's left it concerned that it will not be able to achieve that 10 million target by the end of this year. So what to do about it? Well, on the 26th of November, which is 4 days from now, it will roll out a massive vaccination campaign to get more people, as many people as possible, vaccinated. And by December 21st, a vaccine mandate will come into force. What does it mean? Well, simply, those not vaccinated by then will not be able to access private or public services. This is going to hit Kenyans hard because this is the festive period. A lot of Kenyans will be traveling for their festive holidays. So this is bound to get a lot of people who've not been vaccinated rushing to go get the jab.
Dr. Aslam, let's bring it to you in Johannesburg. How are governments going to implement these deadlines, especially here on the continent, if they don't have enough vaccines?
Good afternoon. I unfortunately could not hear your correspondent. But on the question of how we're going to reach the targets that we've set out, unfortunately, most countries in Africa, in fact, all of them, are supply takers. That means we are totally dependent on availability of vaccines that are produced elsewhere, and where certainly we don't stand in the front of the queue when it comes to being able to put forward huge amounts of funding. So I think there's going to be generally a missing of targets, but the targets are still important to maintain because, it's an aspiration to reach those. And if we miss them, we just have to continue pushing for vaccination until we do reach a degree of population immunity that can help us overcome the worst phases of this pandemic.
Robert, from what you're hearing, how does Kenya plan to execute its plan?
Well, the government plans to hit Kenyans where it hurts most, this being a festive season. So no access to public or private services. As far as public or government services, you'll not be able to renew your driving license, marriage certificate, death certificate. You'll not be able to access any government services, your hospital fund, anything related to government or public services, you'll not be able to access, including government buildings. You'll not be able also to get access to public transport unless you're vaccinated, and you'll have to show proof of vaccination. You will also not be able to access any private facilities or services, which means restaurants, hotels, I beg your pardon, restaurants or hotels or any other private services available here in Kenya. Now, the other worry for the government, because the vaccine uptake at the moment is only 8.8% of the population, is that we've got a general election coming in 2022. Now, you're talking about at least over 20 million Kenyans, 25 million Kenyans eligible to vote who are supposed to take part in that election, with most of the population not vaccinated at the moment, and with the infection rate low. They believe that we will begin to see an increase in that infection rate. So they're trying to line themselves with other international standards, get as many people as possible vaccinated so that they can be able to open up the country, the economy, where tourism plays a huge, huge role. So that's the situation at this particular moment.
Dr. Aslam, you mentioned some of the challenges that a lot of African countries, you just say that there might be a lot of countries that are going to miss those targets, and yet it's important to have those targets in place. How, from what you're hearing, how are African governments planning to vaccinate at least 10% of their populations before the end of the year, and is it actually doable?
Well, that's remains to be seen. It's a modest target, and one would have expected in the normal course that we would have reached at least 10% of the population. But it's unlikely to be a uniform expectation or even achievement at this time. Look, I think governments are faced with a particular dilemma. I know here in South Africa, the government has opted to encourage voluntary vaccination. And while there was an initial big surge towards getting vaccinated, we've only managed to vaccinate some 24% of the adult population with a single shot. So a number of them, those especially taking the Pfizer vaccine, will still need to get their second shot to be fully vaccinated. Now, the problem that we face is with this declining uptake, there has to be an encouragement in some form, an incentive of some type to get vaccinated. And they're trying all sorts of measures, giving cash vouchers to people to encourage them to come. They are holding off on issuing a mandate for vaccines. And I think that's sensible for now. But if we end up in a situation where we are hopelessly under-vaccinated and facing new variants or new waves, I don't think we should, worry too much about instituting mandatory vaccines. This is something most societies are used to. You all get your children vaccinated, or they can't go to school. So that's a mandate, at any given moment. And so I think this as a practice is not a problem. The law here seems to be comfortable with introducing mandates, can't speak about other countries, but it's a very important last-ditch, instrument that the governments do have to increase vaccination in the population. And we shouldn't be surprised if more and more governments go the way the Kenyan government seems to be going.
Dr. Aslam, thank you so much for that. Robin Nagila speaking to us from our newsroom here in Nairobi, and Dr. Aslam Dusua, co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum, and he was speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, over in Uganda, scientists are encouraging more people to consider adding insects to their diet so that they can boost their nutrition intake. Apart from white ants, grasshoppers are a major delicacy in Uganda. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga brings us that story.
It's a grasshopper season. Abdallah Sibulala positions the trap to harvest the green hoppers. Grasshoppers, locally known as insenene, are a delicacy here in Uganda.
That's a sign that the grasshoppers arrived late. They first take a rest somewhere, and when we switch on the lights, they come out.
When the insects hit the traps, they slide right into the drums. They are later harvested. The hoppers are then stripped of their legs and wings. They can be either boiled or pan-fried.
They are really tasty. You do not have to add oil to fry them. They have their own natural oils.
Ugandan scientists are now encouraging more locals to include grasshoppers on their menu because of its nutritional benefits.
Grasshoppers have quite a number of nutrients that are beneficial to our bodies. The major three nutrients that they have, we have proteins, we have fats, we have carbohydrates.
But the insects are seasonal. Grasshoppers are harvested twice a year, and to keep them on the menu, Ugandan scientists are studying their biological habit to enable farmers to breed them throughout the year. The traders are concerned that they are seeing less hoppers coming into the market. They blame the decline in insect numbers on human activities that are destroying their natural habitats.
Grasshoppers thrive in a well-protected environment. The more we cut down forest, we're going to miss the delicacy.
According to Global Forest Watch, Uganda has lost 7.6% of its tree cover in the last 18 years. Environmentalists are now campaigning to save the natural habitats for the hoppers. They are planting more trees to restore the forest cover, a move expected to improve grasshopper harvests, but also boost the nutrition for those who love the hopper delicacy. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
So South Sudan's government says that it is committed to reforms proposed by the International Monetary Fund to try and stabilize the economy. The Washington-based lender wants to see more transparency in the government's financial transactions in return for more support. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports from Juba.
South Sudan's economy depends on oil to fund 98% of its budget, but floods like these have impacted production and government coffers, and high-ranking officials claim the country is broke. Over the years, South Sudan has turned to the International Monetary Fund for help. The lender injected more than $500 million, which has helped the central bank to bring the value of the pound on the parallel market closer to the official rate.
Unification of the exchange rate market, very important for facilitating export promotion and further industrialization in the country, and also promoting transparency in the use of government resources. We think are going to be very important going forward.
Every month, South Sudan's government earns money from the sale of crude oil, but just how much it receives is not revealed to the public. The government now promises to embark on reforms that will promote transparency.
And we are also going to improve on management of our cash. We are going to improve also the collection of our revenue and to minimize little gaps which are there and small and any kind of corruption.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has appointed and sacked 3 finance ministers in the past 2 years while trying to find a lasting solution to the country's economic crisis.
President Kiir says some of his former finance ministers were not transparent in their financial dealings and even kept him in the dark despite being the head of state and government.
Many Juba residents are urging the country's finance ministry and the central bank to do more to improve the economy.
The government is not paying salaries of civil servants regularly. When civil servants are not paid, there's no market for our products because our clients are civil servants.
6 years of civil war have also had their impact. Businesses have been forced to close and people are without work. The pandemic has worsened an already dire economic situation, and the majority of the people cannot now afford basic goods. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
In sports, South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns ladies football club returned home to a resounding welcome on Sunday as the newly crowned champions of Africa following their 2-0 triumph over Ghanaian outfit Hasaka's ladies in Friday's historic final held in Cairo. CGTN's CS Duplessis was at their arrival in Johannesburg and filed this report.
It was a party atmosphere on Sunday morning as the supporters of Masanda Wanda gathered in their numbers to welcome the new Continental Club champions. Dancing, beating drums and a DJ playing supporter songs greeted the triumphant squad as they proudly displayed the coveted CAF Women's Champions League trophy.
As Mamelodi Sundowns Football Club, a South African football club, a football club that fielded the first 11 in the final was all South African women. There's a very special moment that I think we find ourselves in that the future of South African female football looks very, very bright. And without sounding too cliche, I think the future of South African football, I think the sky is the limit for where it can go.
Captain Zanele Nhlapo believes that the collective effort from everyone involved was key to their success.
So we had to focus, like I said, to work hard. The team spirit, the girls were always excited, singing and dancing, I've said this before, that when you're in the team, you need the young players and also the experienced one, because when you mix those two, you get the energy, So I think teamwork, it helped us a lot.
Head coach Jerry Chabalala lauded the effort of his charges and believes that the women's game in South Africa is headed in a positive direction.
When it comes to club competition, there we are again. South African team showed that our standard here in South Africa, it has grown leaps and bounds. And as I've said there, you could also see from our junior teams in the junior teams that they are doing quite well. But it's something that we still need to nurture and take care of it, see to it that we dominate everywhere.
As the triumphant Mamelodi Sundowns ladies team enjoy the spoils from their continental conquest, it shines a positive spotlight on the women's game in South Africa and how far it has come in a relatively short space of time. The achievement on the field goes beyond just a result. It's a watershed moment and one that will set the tone for the foreseeable future. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Former Manchester United manager